worked for a few years in healthcare, so I feel like I've done kind of the Adventist trifecta, right? I've been at all different areas and have done horribly in every single one. That's why I keep moving from one to the other, apparently. People are like, nah, we don't want you anymore. But also, my degree is it's usually a point of discussion, so I figure I'll just explain it. It's in semiotics and future studies, which most people go, that sounds weird. It's basically the study of signs. The best way to think of it is, have you ever read Wired magazine? Wired magazine is a magazine that's kind of it's a forecaster of what's going on in technology. My degree is essentially that for faith and faith communities. And so I'm by no means a fortune teller. If you use the term futurist, sometimes people get a little weird with that. It's not weird and spooky. It's just that we look at the trends that are happening today in today's world, especially when it comes to faith, and try and forecast where things are going and be at the front end of that curve, if at all possible. And that's been a real opportunity for me. That learning was really helpful to me when I went back into ministry after spending some time in healthcare and being able to grow the Crosswalk Church in Redlands, California, which has been a pretty phenomenal experience. But the opportunity to come here and speak with educators is really exciting for me, and so I'm really glad that Steve called, because you have an amazing opportunity to affect the lives of young people. And I mean, it's phenomenal. In fact, there's a quote from 2017. Let me make sure I've got my notes up here. John Wesley Taylor, works at the GC, said this basically: Adventist Education is the longest and largest evangelistic event held by the Adventist Church. It is also one of the most effective. Can you agree with that? Amen. I'd like to put one more thing in there that he didn't say. It's paid for by the people you're evangelizing, right? Because I don't know if you know how the economics of our church work, but a lot of money goes into evangelism. A lot of money goes into evangelism, to holding amazing events. You do evangelism every single week in your classroom, and the students pay for it, right? That's a pretty good economic model if you want to know the truth. I think that's pretty incredible and pretty important. I wish I could move this a little. Oh, I can. There we go. This is going to be better. All right. So we understand that Adventist education is important, and we can go through a lot of statistics. Listen, I grew up in the home of value genesis. My dad was the guy who did it. And so I remember being in high school. I was a junior in 1989, I think, when they did the first test of value genesis. And I went home to my dad and I was like, Dad, you can't give that test again. It's 610 questions. It's ridiculous. Nobody's going to answer that. 65,000 students over the U.S. And the world actually answered those questions. It's the largest study of Protestant youth from any organization. It's a pretty powerful study. He did it every year for 10 years. For 30 years. He did it every 10 years for 30 years. I'm having trouble getting that out. And then I learned something. He died in May last year, and which was bad. But I learned something after that. They bequeath research to someone in the family. So I started getting calls from people writing articles saying, we'd like to use the value genesis research. I'm like, great, sounds good. And they're like, no, we need your written approval. I was like, why? And they said, well, it's yours now. Which is I didn't even know where it was. By the way, just to be clear, if you know your demise is coming, I learned this through the process. If you know your demise is coming, give the people who love you your passwords. All right? And don't have some weird sort of format that only you know to know which password is what. We spent 6 months trying to decode his little notes in his iPhone. It was ridiculous. So if you could do that, that'd be helpful for everyone involved. Anyway, listen. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time here talking about statistics. You can go look those up. They're available everywhere. But we do know that this is really effective. In fact, this is kind of interesting. Each year for the past 10 years, there have been at least 30,000, and in some years more than 50,000 students in Adventist schools baptized during the school year. You know that? 30 to 50,000. Primarily culminating in events such as Week of Prayer, which, by the way, Week of Prayer is the third most influential spiritual event that happened in students' lives. The first is the mother spirituality, second is the father spirituality, and third is Week of Prayer. Isn't that amazing? It really makes a difference. We have a tendency to think, oh no, it's a Week of Prayer. The schedule's going to be a mess. Again, right? Because you know that's the first thing. You get that schedule and you're like, every day is different. Students are just randomly walking into your classroom. You're like, not now. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know. It's a Week of Prayer. I don't know what's going on. My wife still works in an academy. She works at Loma Academy, and she'll come home, and she's like, week of prayer. I'm like, Sarah, third most important spirit. She's like, Yeah, but why does class start at 11:53? That doesn't make any sense at all. That's not anything on anyone's calendar. Okay, but the total for 2006 through 2015 was 427,313 baptisms. Can you believe that? That's amazing, right? This is equivalent to a typical size conference being established each year through the evangelistic ministry of Adventist Education. That's amazing. Now, we're not talking about retention, right? That's something different. Because what we have a tendency to do is graduate kids from school, and they graduate from church too, right? And we have to address that, and we have to start figuring out what we can do about that. But this is the premise of what we're talking about today. Adventist education is effective in growing the kingdom of God, especially when it is approached with intention and thoughtfulness. But I'm not simply talking about the lesson plans that you lean into every single week. I'm talking about the intention that you take into class each day as an opportunity to forward the kingdom of God. So we're going to go back. We're going to go back and not deal with today. We're going to go back in and ask you one question, which is, why do you do this? Why in the world would you do this? And why in the world would you do it for an organization that doesn't pay you well enough? Amen? It's all right. It's not disloyal to say that. We can say that. It's all right. I don't think you get paid enough. I don't think I get paid enough. That's all right. Listen, I understand that this is really, what this really is a personal question of calling. And first of all, we need to reclaim that word outside of pastoral ministry. I had a friend in college who was going into sports management. And I had gotten this call to go into ministry. I felt like I was being called, and I told him, I feel called into ministry. And he's like, I feel called into sports management. And I was like, no, you don't. Because I don't know what that is. And by the way, sports management is not managing sports figures. Did you know that? He's now the dean of sports management at Temple University. Brilliant guy. And he's actually setting up an NCAA system in Japan with the NCAA. It is about managing the events in which sports happen. It's fascinating to me. And it sits in the School of Hospitality. Weird. But normally we don't use the term calling for too much outside of pastoral ministry, and that's really a shame, because at some point you felt called to do this, right? Or you wouldn't have chosen it. Come on. This is a tough job. You have to show up early. Every day. You do get summers. That's nice. But I know most of you are working through the summer because you're getting excited about what's coming up next year, right? Right. However, teachers do have this little thing. I was a pastor working in a teacher's world, right? One of the things that teachers have, which is not really fair, is that you think if you're not in the classroom, you're not actually working. Pastors think if you're awake, you're working, right? Because pastoral ministry is a lifestyle, not a job. That's what we say. So we're doing it all the time. It's like in seminary, when they say read all these books, and you figured if they were in your library and you were in the house, you were sort of reading them. That's the way, like osmosis. I put them under my pillow at night. They'd be like, did you read them? I spent time with that book. A lot of time with that book. But we need to recapture this idea of calling, right? Because you are called to this work. And I don't know how it happened. I don't know what your burning bush was. But I believe the bush is still burning. Somewhere in your life, you had someone speak into you, and you said, I want to do that. In fact, most people remember their teachers more than they remember their pastors. Most people remember their teachers more than they remember their pastors. Now, bushes still burn. It's not as dramatic as it used to be in the Old Testament. That's such a great story, isn't it? It's such a great story, and there's something that happened in that story that's really important that we can use as one of our foundational understandings for today and for the work that you do. See, Moses was herding sheep. Anyone done that? It's not a great job. We liken it to a parking lot attendant. It's that boring. And I don't know if you know a lot about sheep, but they're not smart. They're not smart at all. And remember, this wasn't like, have any of you been to Wales? Wales is a gorgeous country. Rolling hills. There's shepherds everywhere in Wales because there's no economy. There's pretty much just, here's some sheep, go out into the field. But it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, and the sheep seem like they just want you to take off their fur and make a sweater. It's beautiful, right? That is not what was going on with Moses. He's in the middle of the desert, right? It's hot, it's horrible, there's scorpions everywhere, in my head. That's what I think it was like. And he goes and he walks and he sees a bush, and the bush is on fire, but it's not really burning up. That's how the scripture says, right? And then an angel speaks, or the voice of God comes out of the bush and says, hey, take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. Now, that was patently untrue until God showed up. Right? He was just standing on the ground until God showed up, and then that work became holy. Right? So you can be a competent professional, but it's not holy work until God's invested in it. It's as simple as that. And you must know that because you work at a Seventh-day Adventist Christian educational facility. And you could go work somewhere else and make more money. It's not about competency, it's about calling. And if it's about calling, that means you have to look at this job completely different than you have before. And you answered the call that God gave you, which is so cool. And the reason why it's cool is because every yes to God's call is an incarnation of Jesus Christ in the world. When we talk about incarnation, and this is a term we use around Christmas a lot, right? The incarnation, the enfleshment of God. God was skin on it. But there's a real truth to the idea of incarnation. And this makes a difference to you and your work every single day, even though you may not have these words for it particularly, because everything incarnates. Everything that you're feeling, everything that you're experiencing, everything that you are frustrated about, everything that you are joyful about, all that incarnates in your life. It all becomes real and manifests itself. And the problem with teachers is this: you're never alone. So you're manifesting in front of these incredibly impressionable minds all the time. So whatever you're incarnating, they're catching. Whatever it is that they're witnessing from you, they believe it to be true because they trust you. And they know that they're going to listen to what you say and listen to what you do, which is really important. The proximity that students have to our incarnation is palpable, it's tangible. And I recognize this most profoundly when I moved from church ministry into chaplaincy at Loma Linda Academy. So I was working in San Diego, had a youth group, growing a youth group. It was a lot of fun. I saw those kids maybe 4 hours a week. That's pretty good. 4 hours of programming at just a regular community church was pretty good. And then I went to Loma Linda Academy, and I had 600 kids around me all day, every single day. And so many of them wanted to hang out in my office rather than go to class. I don't know why. It was weird. Not Steve's class. They all went to Steve's class because he'd chase them down, pretty much. But no, you're around these kids all the time. And that's where they, in school ministry, you're with them more than their parents, more than anyone else in their lives. So you better believe that everything about you incarnates into their lives. But the truth is, pastors and teachers feel that same call. So we should know how to work together a little bit better. Am I right? Now, some of you may come from situations where the pastor is deeply involved, and some of you may come from situations where you don't know who the pastor is. Some of you may come from situations where there's multiple churches that are constituent churches of your school, and some are involved, some are less involved. So we're going to speak in generalities. But I thought we'd talk for a little while for about a few reasons why we don't work together. And I think the first one is this. The first one is that there are systems in place that make the relationship between education and pastoral ministry antagonistic. Right? Let's just get that one out on the table. Right? As a pastor, I'll do it from the ecclesial side, and then I'll do it from the academic side, which you know about. Right? From the ecclesial side, it works like this. They take all the tithe. We take all the tithe. But it doesn't feel like we are giving it to we sometimes. Right? Local church brings in the tithe and sends it all. And then we get a bill from our local school that sometimes dwarfs our local church ministry. So we're raising money that goes away, and then we're raising more money that goes away, and then we have a little left to do ministry in the church. And listen, I'm not here to try and fix that situation. I'm saying that's the reality of the situation, right? And oftentimes educators get frustrated because you know what a good evangelistic tool education really is, right? So you know, and you're like, these people need to invest in this school. We're over here on the pastoral side saying we barely have enough money to do what we need to do. And now I got to give you more. And by the way, I don't have that much influence over at the school because sometimes there's a good relationship and sometimes there's not. Also, pastors move a lot more than principals do, and school teachers do. So oftentimes, pastors will come into a situation where it might be a good relationship, it might not be a good relationship. They don't really know how to navigate it, so this is what they do. I got my church to worry about. We'll let the school be the school, and I got my church to worry about. And we'll pay a bill. I know that I've seen letters that have come from schools that have just upped their subsidy by 30% one year. And they just sent it. Nobody gave a heads up to the pastor. They just sent it. Now all of a sudden, the church is running itself in the red. Understand that that's an antagonism that begins to happen. It feels like you're being taxed sometimes by the tithe, and then you're being taxed again by education. Now, I'm not saying it's not a good investment. I'm saying that that's the reality of how it feels, right, from the ecclesial side. And I'm not speaking for every pastor, and I'm not even making a value statement on this. I'm just saying this is sometimes how it feels. Now, on the other side, education is going, how come we can't get more? We never have enough. We need to get more. How come they're not investing more in this? Maybe they just don't understand Christian education. Maybe they just don't understand what we do every day, the amount of time that we have with our kids. They need to be pouring more in here. The problem is what we've done is we've worked on a scarcity economy for so long in the Seventh-day Adventist Church that we don't believe in abundance anymore. Right? This is the problem. I go speak in lots of different places, and I've worked in lots of different places. And everyone has the same mentality. We don't have enough. There couldn't be I got to say this correctly, a more powerful statement of no faith. I still didn't say that very well, did I? That is a powerful statement about how little faith we have. Okay. I thought that was coming my direction, but apparently. I don't know that phone number, so... right? So this is the problem. We work in a scarcity economy. We work in a scarcity economy. We work in an economy that says there is not enough. And because there's not enough, if somebody has some, that means I have less. And if you've worked in a place where there's lots of churches around, churches don't get along with each other. Because every time a church does well, we are assuming all the rest of the churches are not doing as well. And I would assume the same is true in the school situation. Right? So there are some layers here that make these relationships relatively difficult. But again, it's because we don't believe that God has enough. We don't say it that way, though, because that would sound bad. What we say is we don't think there is enough. But we're people of faith, right? So we believe in God. So the actual statement that we're making is we don't believe that God has enough. Listen, are we people of faith or not? We know that God has enough, right? It speaks to it a lot in Scripture, right? God created all this. He doesn't need a lot of your stuff. I love the interaction of Jesus and the Pharisees around around giving unto Caesar's what is Caesar's. You know that interaction, right? It's so phenomenal. They're standing there. They're like, we're going to trap Jesus. And so they say, okay, who should you pay taxes to? And you know, the trap was if he says that they should pay to Caesar, then he's not really a Hebrew. And if he says he shouldn't, then he's seditious to the state. And so Jesus, the way he answers them is phenomenal, right? He goes, anybody got a coin? Right from the beginning. He's not even going to assent that he's part of this. Anybody got a coin? Probably one of the Pharisees is like, yeah, I got a coin. Here you go. All right. And then he goes, whose face is that? And I wish the translation could capture what I think is deep sarcasm, right? He goes, whose face is that? Like, you knew whose face that was. Whose face is that? And he goes, Caesar's. Well, you better give it back to him. Apparently he needs it. And then he goes, but you make sure you give God what is God's. What is God's? Everything. So make sure you honor God in the way that God needs to be honored. We are people of faith. That means we believe and have faith and hope in the fact that God has enough of everything that we all might thrive. Right? But what we do is we work in a scarcity economy and we look at each other going, hey, this is not good. We need more. And then we become very jealous of the resources that we have. And I understand that. But listen, I believe this. The scale of your vision must match the scale of our God. The biggest problem in Adventism, in my opinion, and feel free to quote me on this, although no one will believe it. The biggest problem in Adventism is not that we believe right or wrong. The biggest problem in Adventism is that we don't believe enough. We don't believe God is big enough. We don't believe God is powerful enough. We have leaned into the myth of our own competency, right? And this is the good part and bad part about being an educated group of people. We educate people to be incredibly competent, and we have incredibly competent people. Listen, I live in Loma Linda. Everybody's got like 4 titles and 9 degrees. It's exhausting, right? Everyone's a vice president of something. It's ridiculous, right? But when we lean onto our own competency and not into the vision of who God really is, then we will always fall short, and there will never be enough because we aren't enough. We understand that it's God. I mean, listen, if it's not a leap, is it even faith? We say that we're faith-based. I'd much rather be faith-driven. Because when we're faith-based, it's like something that launched us. But we're faith-driven, it's something that drives us. And if we're going to do that, then we better be people of faith. Then the scale of our vision needs to get much, much bigger. Listen, that's a long time on that. Here's one of the second reasons that I think sometimes pastors aren't involved. Some of them just didn't go to Adventist schools, especially elementary and secondary schools. A lot of them just didn't go. Statistic in our conference, and I can't verify it, it was said by the headmaster of Loma Linda Academy a few years ago. He said only 25% of the Southeastern California pastoral staff had been to elementary or secondary education in Adventism. So they don't understand the intrinsic value. Even if they caught up in college, they didn't experience it when they were young. And because of that, it might not be in their thinking. It might not be part of the value of ministry that they have. And that's worth thinking about. And so I would ask the question to all my pastors in the area, hey, did you go to Adventist schools? But you don't say it like Adventists say it, right? Don't say it like, did you go to Adventist schools? Like, try to get the judgment out. And just be like, hey, you go to Adventist. I don't know how you can say it. Here's a better way. Hey, where'd you go to elementary school? Right? That's better, I think. Here's another reason sometimes they don't show up. They're just not invited. Or this is the invitation, and this is a weird invitation from a pastor, okay? This is a weird invitation. The school goes, hey, we'd love to have you stop by. I'm a grown man. I'm just going to go loiter at a school? No, just for the record, I know you're like, no, that's not what they mean. No, that is what you mean, because you guys work. So if I show up at 10:30 in the morning and walk in, you're like, what are you doing here? So I'm going to go hang out at the playground? People get arrested for that. And it's an awkward thing. So if you're going to invite somebody, and please do invite them, but invite them for a reason, right? And then give them a timeline that you'd like them to be there, and then they can leave. Because pastors are, often, not all of us probably, but often they're busy people, right? There is a fallacy that pastors work an hour a week, right? And some might. I don't know. I've heard some sermons that I'm pretty sure were downloaded from the internet. I've heard people preach my sermons before. I'm like, can't believe it happened to him too. It's fascinating. But there is a fallacy there. Pastors are actually relatively busy people, but they do have control over their schedules a little bit more certainly than you do. So if that's the case, invite them in and say, hey, I'd love you to come and do this from here until here, and then you can go. But our kids would love it. Listen, if week of prayers are that important in the spiritual growth of our young people, invite a pastoral staff of a multiply staff church to do a week of prayer and just send somebody different every day from that church. 10 minutes. Doesn't need to be a lot. 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Or invite them to, at a track and field day, invite them to keep time for something. Make it specific so they know what they're doing when they show up. Because oftentimes we walk in and we walk around and then feel we're not even sure if we're supposed to walk into a class. Because every time we walk into a class, it's a disruption. And some of you handle disruption really well. Others of you, and you know who you are. You're like, because I got to get to page 46 today. And if I'm not on page 46 today, probably the earth will stop turning. Right? Some of you function like that. I was never that kind of teacher. I was like, oh, come on in, let's hang out. Like, I don't know what I'm doing today anyway. I mean, I had a lesson plan, but I always felt like they were suggestions more really than the rule, right? I wrote it. Nobody's going to know if I don't do it anyway. That's how I felt about it. But not all of us feel that way. Not all of us feel that way. And many of you are much better at this than I am. So invite them to speak. Invite them to teach something specific. Have them come in and teach a section that you want them to know about. And by the way, it doesn't just have to be like the sanctuary doctrine that you don't want to teach. Because I've gotten that call, hey, Pastor, can you come explain the sanctuary doctrine? How old are they? I'm going to simplify this. So have them teach anything, something different. Invite them to come and pray in your classroom, right? Or invite them even to do something that's not necessarily spiritual in nature. Or how about this? Let them use your space as a space to convene. One of the things I say to hospitals all the time when I'm working with them, I say, listen, in your local community, you're probably the largest employer, so be the convener. Let your city council, if they don't have a great space at City Hall, let them meet in the hospital because you've got a great room probably. Same thing for schools. Become the convener. Say to the churches around you, listen, if you don't have the right space for this particular meeting, come here. We'll figure out a time and a place for you to be so that they become comfortable being on the campus. Invite, 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 invite. Now listen, there's going to be some pastors who just don't ever do it. Nothing you can do about that, right? But harvesting and cultivating that relationship will really, I think, improve things a lot. And I think one of the last reasons why we don't work together is that schools take people away from churches. I know you're trying to figure that out, so let me explain. Because you're like, no, we don't. Yes, you do. You do, especially secondary schools. Every choir trip, every sports trip, everything, you take people away from the local church. I was a youth pastor in a local church, and man, when the school would go on choir tour, my kids wouldn't be there. And I was like, what? I expected there to be 50 kids, and now there's 10. And I know what you're saying. Well, you should have looked at the calendar. Yeah, that would have been way easier. Except that's not my calendar. That's your calendar. And yeah, after the first year, I was like, I better look at their calendar. But when you schedule things at school, you need to consider churches. And maybe many of you do. But at Loma Linda Academy in May, we had the dreaded calendar for the next year meeting, right? Where you sit down and we're like, we're going through the whole year. My job was to just hold back the powers that be. And that school is like on steroids. Like everybody has to be doing something all the time, it felt like. And my job was just to hold back so we could have we called them one church weekend a month where nobody was doing anything. And they knew that all their kids could be at their churches. And then we sent out a letter to the churches in the area and said, hey, we have held these weeks with absolutely no scheduling so you guys can run your big events. Now, I don't know that they all appreciated the fact that we were handing them a schedule. They didn't. They didn't like it at all. But at least there was a courtesy there. This is what's going on, right? If your local church is not going to consider your calendar first, probably. So let them know about your calendar if you can. And keep reminding them. So when I got to Crosswalk 5 years ago, one of their big things was, because we're 2.5 miles from Loma Linda University. They're like, listen, on weekends, on especially like holiday weekends, 3-day weekends, you won't have anybody at your church. There'll be less than 50% of people at your church. And I was like, I don't think that's true. We're going to do church well, and so we have tried to do church well. After a few years, it became inconsequential what their calendar was because we became a bit of a center of gravity. But that's because we had momentum, and that's because we finally had critical mass, and we were like, okay, we don't need to consider. But that's not the case in most situations. What you do at the school affects the church greatly. And so a quid pro quo on the communication there, bless you, on the communication there is really, it was very cute, Natalie. Some people don't sneeze cute. Some people you're like, bless you, because your insides are out now, but yours was nice. There's also another thing that I didn't put here that I'm just thinking of right now, actually. And I've been guilty of this. Sometimes schools do such great spiritual programming that they literally take the kids away from the church because they're honestly, they're being grown spiritually, but they cease to be connected to the church. And so what happens is when they graduate from school, they graduate from church. They're not connected to the church anymore. And so we need to think about that. And that's not to say don't do good spiritual programming, just the opposite of that. Make sure you're doing collaborative spiritual programming, right? There's no reason that a youth pastor in your area can't be at your chapel, even if he's got nothing to do. That invitation needs to be open. And even give him a spot where he can help take attendance or she can help take attendance, that sort of thing. Like give them an opportunity to be involved, to help with the programming of it. If possible, it's really good. But here's a few, that was negative. So here's a few reasons about how a few ways we can work together. The first one is shared values. What is the mission statement of the church as opposed to the mission statement of the school? How does that connect with those two things? Do they work together on those things? And how is it expressed in literature? Right? We have an interesting situation. You want to hear my situation at Crosswalk? We are a church, we are a constituent church of Redlands Adventist Academy. Great little school. I don't know if it's little. It's a good school. We, however, have absolutely no say on the board because the way the constitution of that school was written was that no combined constituent schools can outvote Redlands and the amount of board members that they have if they vote in a block. So I go to the board meeting, not often, I will admit, but I go to the board meeting and I know that my vote doesn't matter. How invested do you think we are in the school? We support the school. We pay for students to go to the school. We remodeled their little student lounge. Like, we are invested in the school. But we also know we don't really get a say. So we don't have a lot of shared values. And the hard part is with multiple churches is that if I go, hey, and get kind of a bully pulpit and say, we want you to express some of the values that we have as a church, Redlands will go, nope. And now all of a sudden the churches are at odds. I don't want to do that. So what we do is we try and be supportive relatively quietly. But that's a weird situation that we kind of have to work through. So what are those shared values and how can you express those things together? Also, this leads to the next part, which is recognizing the mutual benefit of each organization to thrive. A thriving school should be sending people to a thriving church. And a thriving church should be sending people to a thriving school. There's a couple variables that we need to mention. First of all, that means both of you need to be doing your jobs quite well. And you need to be figuring out ways that one can inform the other. And I'm not talking about just having a choir go sing at a church. That's great. But how about having a 4th grade class pick up the offering so that all those non-Adventist students will come and pick up the offering and their parents will be in church that week? And then how about working with the pastor to say, hey, this is going to be a big week because we're going to have people who are not Adventists stepping into our church. How about we do things in a way that will be really interesting to them and attractive to them so that they can go? But you see, we've got a problem again, I think. And the problem is this. We have an entitlement culture within Adventism that has to be broken. Right? The entitlement is, you're an Adventist, send your kid to our school, and if not, I will judge you. But you know what? Sometimes the Adventist school in the area is not the best educational option for a student. Sometimes you are not. Let me give you an example, a personal example. My daughter's dyslexic. My daughter's like crazy dyslexic. Straight A student. She got to Walla Walla, huge scholarship. She's phenomenal. But her name is Hannah, which is a palindrome, and she spells it wrong. So I'm like, Hannah, how do you spell it wrong? She's like, I don't know. You know that dyslexic paragraph you can look on the internet where everything's flipping around? She was like, Dad, look at this. And I was like, Hannah, is that how you see? She's like, well, to be clear, that just looks normal to me. I don't know what it's doing, but it said it's the dyslexic paragraph. So we were at one of our schools in our area, and her resource teacher said to her when she was in 4th grade or 5th grade, hey, if you tried harder, you wouldn't be dyslexic. Yeah, that was weird. I happened to be in Australia at the time on a FaceTime call, and I was losing it, but the volume was off. So I'm like, blah, 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 blah. My wife's handling her business over here. She's doing the same thing, I think. But I'm like, blah, blah, blah. Finally, my wife just turns it off. And I'm like, so I called her back later. I was like, what's going on? She's like, you were very distracting. You were making lots of hand motions, but we didn't know what you were saying. So, let's be clear. I took my kids out of Adventist schools. My daughter went to a Montessori public charter school right next door, one of 3 that have a working farm in the United States, the oldest and largest working farm Montessori school. It's $16,000 a year in 6th grade, and in 7th grade, it becomes a charter public school. They accept 35 kids a year. So she got in. Phenomenal. Changed her. And by the way, the interview that the principal had was the most spiritual and thoughtful interview that my kids had ever sat through. The intention that they put in was not only admirable, I was jealous of it and wondered why we didn't talk to our students that way. And the reason why is because we have an entitlement culture. And by the way, it goes both ways, right? It goes both ways. The other way is that the churches aren't willing to up their game to receive people who are at your schools and might not be connected to the Adventist system. They're not going to change what they do one iota to bend into somebody who doesn't necessarily know our culture. And so what we do is we have churches that aren't doing a great job, and we have schools that might not be doing a good job, and we're both assuming that the other one is going to support the other one when we've let the ball drop or the bar drop so low that really none of us are doing a great job at what we're doing anymore, and nobody's coming in. And then we go, God doesn't have enough. Really, that's God's fault? Maybe that's our fault. And I wasn't expecting the room to get quite so quiet. Maybe those are hard words to hear. But listen, we do what we do for God. Before we do it for any man, for any woman, for any child that walks into our room, we do it for God. So we should be giving absolutely the best experience to anyone who walks through our doors. Not so that our organizations can survive, but so that God might be honored in the work that we do. That means we need to be doing better than a non-faith-based or faith-driven institution, because we have a standard that is so much higher. Our standard is eternity. Because it's a fallacy to think that you just need more resources to give a better education, or you need more resources to do church better. That's not true. What you need is better intention. What you need is better thoughtfulness. What you need is to work hard. No, I'm not saying you don't work hard. Right? I know you work incredibly hard. But entitlement culture has allowed us to say, well, we're just going to get all the Adventist students anyway. But we're not. What, less than 35% of kids that are in the Seventh-day Adventist denomination go to Seventh-day Adventist schools? That's huge. You understand that? That's a huge statistic. Now, going to a Seventh-day Adventist school is not going to save a kid. But not going doesn't help. So we have to get rid of entitlement culture. We have to get rid of the idea that you're lucky to be here. No, we're lucky to serve you. Right? The work that we do is holy. Right? We need to be taking off our shoes to do this work. It is a sacred calling and a sacred opportunity. I preach every week. We have 3 services. We have about 2,000, 2,100 people who come every single week. So if I break that down, they're half-hour sermons. That's close to 1,000 hours of people's time. I would never step into that pulpit unprepared, because I would not waste 1,000 sacred hours of people's lives. So how are we, with that kind of intention, stepping into the work that we do every single week? How are we designing the experience of every single student who walks in, every parent who walks in, so that they have absolutely the best experience? I mean, I can't tell you how many hours and how many weeks we spent working on just our lobby experience at the church, so that by the time people walk through our lobby, park their cars, walk through our lobby, and sit down in the church, they think, I never want to go to another place again. How intentional are you in creating the experience for your students and your teachers, and for your parents and your students, I should say? Right? Some of this is just good, solid, intentional work that we believe is God breathed into this. I also think that when we really understand that we all have a vital role to play in the spirituality of every student, we will stop doing something that has happened. I like to call it the great giveaway. Schools go, oh, thank God my kid's in school. They can take care of their spirituality. Teachers go, oh, thank God we've got a church now. The church can take care of their spirituality. And churches go, well, we can't handle it. We don't have enough. Thank God the family's going to take care of their spirituality. We keep giving away rather than handing off these precious students and their spirituality. Because we're assuming one leg of the tripod will be handling it when we aren't necessarily handling it. Listen, folks. Everything incarnates. All the frustration that you feel, all the love that you feel, all of it incarnates in front of those students. And so we have to be incredibly intentional about the way that we work with our churches, about the way that our churches work with us, about the way we design the experience for our students and for our parents. I know you think about this stuff all the time. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But I just want to remind you of the incredibly sacred duty that you have, and to also remind you that pastors and teachers are in the exact same business. You see, because we don't offer the same product as another educational institution. I say this to healthcare professionals all the time. You're not in the same business. You're not educating students. You're teaching them about eternity. You're able to give them hope that transcends any situation in their lives. The product that we are selling is not education. It's a disciple of Christ. That's what we do. And if you don't think that that's what your job is as an Adventist educator, and this may be harsh and I apologize, but if you don't think that's a part of your job, you should go get a job somewhere else. No, the pure common sense of it, that's not a judgment on like you should be a better person. No. Why get paid so little with that responsibility if you don't believe it's yours? If you don't believe it's yours, don't put up with that. Go work in a place where that's not required of you. It's a better fit. And by the way, if you don't leave, there's somebody who has been called to be that disciple maker for Christ in your position that you won't allow them to be in because you will leave. If you hate what you do, and I'm not saying any of you do, but if you hate what you do working in a faith-based institution, feeling like you're not paid enough, feeling like you work too hard, feeling like it is not your responsibility, the spirituality of your students is not your responsibility, if that's how you feel, listen, it's okay. In fact, it's probably more ethical for you to go somewhere else, and you'll be a phenomenally competent teacher somewhere else. But what we do here, that's particular. What we do here is beyond just professionalism and competency. It moves us into the realm of the supernatural. It moves us into the realm of the awe and magnificence of God. That's what we do. Take off your shoes, because this is holy ground and holy work that we do. Listen, let's take 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and talk about the second piece. I know you guys have been sitting for a while. Your religion is your witness, is the shape your love takes in all things. And this is something that you have to recognize, that you are the faith of faith-driven education. Right? It's not an intangible. It's not, oh, I work in an Adventist school. That means absolutely nothing other than the organizational structure. It is inhabited by people of faith. It's inhabited by you. You are the actual faith of a faith-driven healthcare or educational system. And that's really important. And let me tell you why it's important. I told you I work at Azusa in that 7-hour class. And I work in the nursing program, and so I have a bunch of nurses. And I always ask them, why in the world did you choose Azusa Pacific University? It is not cheap. In fact, it's very expensive. And they can go right down the road to Cal State San Bernardino, get the exact same degree. It's going to take a little bit longer because Azusa has kind of a program. But they could very easily the same exact degree. And so I asked them, like, why did you come here? What's the importance? What's the value add of a Christian education? And their answer was always, it's focused on whole person care, but more than anything, it's focused on the intentional spirituality, the paying attention to something more than just the disease process. So I'm like, so love is the reason that you came to school? And they're like, well, it seems like oversimplification. But yeah. We don't want to be just competent nurses. We want to be nurses that know how to love differently. And that's a really important aspect. And as we've thought about that, I've come up with a really simple definition of love. And you by no means have to agree with it. But I think love is simply this. Love is paying attention. That's all it is. What we love, we pay attention to. Which, by the way, saying it that simply, you can kind of do an audit in your life and figure out what it is that you love. Because that's what you pay attention to more than anything else. What you love the most, what you pay attention to. And for us, what we pay attention to first is Christ, or at least it should be. And that attention focuses us then on others, knowing the gift that we have in Jesus. Remember, your witness is the sum of everything. You see, here's the problem. Well, there's two things. First of all, this is really important. We teach students, not subjects. Right? Super obvious, right? I know this is obvious. I worked with a guy who when I first went to the school, I said, hey, so what do you teach? And he said, oh, I teach physics. Or actually, I just teach whatever book they bring in. He's like, I don't care. He's like, I've been here for 30 years. Whatever book they're in, I'm going to teach that class. And I was like, well, how have students changed in 30 years? And he kind of went, they're about the same. And I know that's not true. Because I was a student 30 years ago, and I look at my kids, I'm like, what language are you speaking? And he said, yeah, I teach subject. What's the big deal? I don't care who's in my classroom. I teach physics. I never reconciled myself with that comment. Because that's not true. We teach students. We teach human beings in their formative process. And yeah, if you're a physics teacher, you should probably teach them physics. That's your professional competency, but your calling means that you recognize the person there because that's love. Paying attention, that's love. And see, if the sum of our witness is everything that we do, then we have to understand this as well. Christianity is not a label. Christianity is a verdict. So I have this dream. I'm a horrible golfer. Horrible. Like I'm bad. But I have this dream that someday I'll be out on the golf course playing, and there'll be a foursome behind us, and my first 9 are just amazing. Like I'm birdieing every hole. I get an ace. I get a hole in one. Like it's crazy. I have the best game of my life. We get to the clubhouse. The foursome behind us pulls up, and who's in the golf cart? But Tiger Woods. This worked a little better before Tiger had his issues, but stick with me. He's kind of the only golfer I know. So Tiger Woods walks up and goes, man, I've been watching you. Tell you what, you're a golfer. Man, the next time somebody asks me, hey, do you golf? All I say is, well, Tiger Woods thinks I do. Right? Too often, we go around raising our Christian flag, saying, I'm a Christian, but the sum of our witness does not express that. We don't get to claim that label. That is a verdict that the world puts on us. That is a verdict that your students put on you. Are you a Christian or not? They know. Because it's not about what you believe, or not just simply about what you believe. And because we have a relatively modernist take on our doctrines, we have this tendency to lean into truth as right. And so if we're right, we're fine. Anybody here married? Anybody here gotten in a fight and been right? Men, don't raise your hands. No. So I've been in fights with my wife, and I'm right. I know I'm right. In fact, we've had the argument. She says, you never admit you're wrong. And I'm like, if I was wrong, why would I be in an argument with you? I would have shut up a long time ago. And then she goes, no, you wouldn't have, because you're pig-headed. And then we get in another fight. But listen, I have been right a ton. I've still slept on the couch. Because being right, if that's what you want your witness to be, okay. But do you want to be loving? And sometimes loving means taking a step back from being right. Because there is not an intrinsic value on being right. And unfortunately, so your students know if you're a Christian or not. They know what you believe about Jesus or not. And too often, we're not intentional about the way that we're giving those messages. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. But I want you to understand one thing first. We cannot ask people to go where we're not willing to go ourselves. Right? And too often, people's testimony or witness, whatever you want to call it, have a tendency to take this kind of pie-in-the-sky situation. They go, this is what it's like to be a Christian, when they have never experienced that in their whole life. They say, this is what, it's like when you explain Adventism to somebody, right? And they go, tell me about Adventist. And like, oh, well, keep the Sabbath. And they're like, yeah, say more. And you're like, oh, and they're vegetarian. I mean, I'm not. And they don't go see movies. I mean, well, I do. And they don't drink. Well, we all know people do, right? We have this weird, this is what we are, but we're not that. So why would we give witness to that? With kids who are in front of us every single day for 5 or 6 hours. Because they'll sniff it out quick, won't they? I mean, I loved my kids when they were little. They got a little bigger and had opinions. And the worst part was they were right. There's nothing worse than your 13-year-old's like, hey, Dad. Well, yeah? Why'd you do this when you said this? Like, shut up. Nobody asked you anyway. Oh, it's the worst when you're a preacher and your kid's quoting you from your sermon while you're berating them for something. They're like, Dad, you said we're just supposed to love everybody. I'm like, I love you. You're in trouble. Is that really love? Yeah. You said you have to love well, Dad, and you have to love long, and you have to love hard. And I'm like, this is the hard part of loving. You're in trouble. It's better for you. Never raise smart kids. You want the dumb ones. Mine are way smarter than I am. They take after my wife. She's much brighter than I am. Listen, why do we witness? This is simple. Why do we witness? Right? And we know this. This is the Great Commission, right? Go therefore, making disciples, right? Baptizing them. Into the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. See, this is how this works. When you recognize your calling, that calling begins to spill over into the culture that you create in your classrooms and your environment. When you forget your calling, that spills over too. That's the Incarnation. And then that culture, that spills over into the communities in which we work and serve. Right? And you know how your students express it, right? That teacher doesn't like me. Right? Which is not true. You didn't get into this business because you hate kids, did you? If you did, you're weird. Stop it. That's so mean. I don't know. I've had to say that to my kids. Like, your teacher doesn't hate you. Well, it seems like they do. Well, why? And then sometimes teachers have done stuff. Like the worst one, I think, was my daughter told her teacher she was dyslexic, and the lady said, write your name on the board. So Hannah wrote her name, and she's like, see, you're not dyslexic. What? My daughter didn't learn from that teacher the whole time. You know, even when we sat down with the principal and had that teacher redirect that and do the variations that she needed to, that were outlined in her 504, still, my daughter was done. That woman doesn't like me. That woman thinks I'm a liar. That was Hannah's issue. Because you know she internalizes it, right? Because you know when you criticize a kid, they're not going to dislike you more. They're going to dislike themselves more. Because they still want your affirmation. So this is why we think intentionally about our calling and how that expresses itself into a culture, and then how that overflows into the communities in which we serve. It's kind of a cup, saucer, plate situation. We just keep overflowing. The good thing about love, especially the love that comes from God, is that we know it never ends. You can keep giving it away. It doesn't matter how exhausted you are. There's still more depth to that love that can come for those students. And by the way, this Great Commission, it's not the Great Commission, it's the Great Commission. We don't just do it by ourselves. You don't just have a guilt that we have to go out and preach to all the world, and if we're not doing it all the time, which I think we get in our heads sometimes, we hear that too often, but it's the Great Commission. God says, listen, I can do this without you, but I'd like you to be a part of it. And so I'm going to give you all the tools that you're going to need to have every single person under your influence know exactly who I am. I will reveal myself through you. That's the Great Commission. And you get an opportunity to incarnate that every single day because you want to have an impact on these kids, right? So I'm going to talk for just a little bit here about what it means, let me check my time, about what it means to give witness and how you do it. And this may be, listen, I go speak a lot, and in the middle of my talks I think, I am not saying anything new. This is everything you know. So I apologize if you're sitting here like, duh. But maybe it can re-spark an interest into it. When you are going to sit down and give your testimony, and I encourage every single teacher to do that at some point. In fact, multiple times during the year, where you put down the books, not during a Bible class that you may teach, but when you sit down and go, hey guys, I just want to tell you why I do this. I want to tell you the why of why I'm here. And then you build that narrative for them thoughtfully. And if we don't do that, we end up giving weird kind of witness, and we give witness to something. I mean, we've all been through that, right? We've all been through somebody giving testimony where it's 45 minutes of sin and about 3 minutes of Jesus. Right? I remember a guy came when I was in high school, and man, he had smuggled drugs. Like he had been like in the bottom of trains, and he had been flying, and planes had crashed. Like, it was an amazing story. He's like, and then I got saved. And now I'm a janitor at a school. And I was like, dude, no offense, but like that seemed way cooler what you were doing before. You know? And that's that. I was 15, so whatever. But you know, when we think about our witness and we think about the actual testimony that we're giving, we have to start in prayer. And like I said, I know you know this, but we have to start in prayer. Jesus himself would often go and slip away to the wilderness to pray, right? So you need to begin this process of real thoughtfulness when you and your Savior have an opportunity to speak about what he's done for you or where he brought you from. And if you think you don't need that and you can just wing it, Jesus didn't wing it. Jesus thought about what he was going to say, and he spent time away to do it. So maybe we should take that as a model of what we're doing. You guys talk every day, all day. I know you're really good at it. There's nothing, like, we're in the church world, you know, you work with lay people sometimes, and I remember there was these two girls, they're both in their 20s in graduate school, and I said, listen, will you do announcements? And they're both in healthcare, and they're like, we're not really good at speaking up front. I'm like, you'll be fine, because I don't think that's a real thing, right? Everybody can speak up front. That's easy. I grew up in a teacher's home. I grew up in a pastor's home. Like, they got up, and the sweat on their bodies was overwhelmingly uncomfortable for all of us. They got red. They literally couldn't say sentences. That's when I realized, people should work on what they say before they stand up. Now, teachers are really good at this because it's what you do all the time. But this is something different, and you want your kids to experience this differently. You want them to know, this was different. You want them to go home that day and go, Mom, Dad, I know why Mrs. So-and-so does this. I know why Mr. So-and-so does this. They chose to work at the school for me so that I would know this. We want to form this and develop this differently. So we want to start in prayer, but then we also want to move to preparation, right? Like I said, some of us are great off the cuff. Not all of us are. And I think that you can pretty much break a testimony into 3 pieces. The first one is simply this. It's then. You start with then. This was my life before. But when I met Jesus, this is what happened. And now, this is how things are. Right? Again, not genius. You know how to do this. But I'm going to add one extra element that I want you to what's the word? Uncompromisingly go after. And it's this. I want you to be honest. The problem with testimony is it speaks to something that we are not. And anytime your testimony is anything less than 100% your real, true experience with God, even if it's not great at that moment, we are lying to the people in front of us. I remember the first time I spoke about doubt. Because I was struggling. Honestly, I was struggling. And so I get up and I speak about doubt. And I had 3 people come up to me afterwards and said, how dare you? How dare you speak to doubt? Because if you can't believe, then I can't believe. Think about how that made me feel, already doubting. The only thing that tempered that was the overwhelming amount of people that came up and said, thank God you said the truth. Because I struggle with those same things. Out of that group, Bible studies, out of that group, baptism, for just the ability to be honest. So when you give testimony, and even if you give, be developmentally appropriate, of course. Like, don't lay too much on a 3rd grader. That kid's going to go home and be like, Dad, you got to pull me out of the school. What's going on with that person? So be developmentally appropriate, but also be honest. Right? Because what we've done too often is we have laid the burden of a perfect spirituality on our kids, and when they realize that they don't have that, they're out. Because they can't do it. They simply can't be the perfect kind of Christian that they felt you were being. And now, you know you weren't being that. I know I wasn't being that. I remember the first time I told my church, I said, listen, you need to prepare for worship if you really want to get the whole experience. So that really needs to begin the evening before. You need to close things down. You need to honor the Sabbath a little bit by changing, because you're about to enter into this moment of worship that is really other than anything else you've done before. Like, we're working on this experience together. But one of the things you need to do is, like, maybe you don't have to watch all of Game of Thrones on Friday night. It's okay. And it's funny, the church was like, like the nervousness of the laughter was hilarious. And I was like, come on, you do it. And it was like, okay, yeah, we're human. Good gracious, we're human beings. It's okay. The other funny thing that happened, kind of in the same week, we'd gotten a haze machine at church, because we're like one of those churches, right? Kind of loud, drumming, kind of lights. We got a haze machine. We didn't know how to use it, so we tested it in the afternoon when it was really hot and we had the air conditioning on, and we just had to pump this haze in, like just pump it in, because it was just being all moved around by the 5 air conditioning units. Well, at church the next day, it was morning, so it was cooler. So we start pumping all that haze in, and it looks like the church is on fire. Like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Like, there's haze everywhere. You could hardly see the bass player. He's like, what is happening? Like, it was like, if you've ever seen Spinal Tap, this is Spinal Tap, the movie, it was like that. It was just overwhelmingly ridiculous, right? And we're Adventists, so we don't know how to deal with things in a laughing manner, by and large. We're a little bit of an uptight group of people. And you could tell the congregation's like, and we always go to the, what are they trying to do to us feel, right? That's like, what's he trying to do? Is there some sort of... So I walk up, I'm to speak, and I'm literally doing this, like, this is stupid. I mean, we're in Southern California, so there's a lot of smog, so it's maybe not as bad as it could have been. But I stand up and I go, I don't know if you guys noticed, we got a haze machine. Right? The church does that. They go, And they're still like, they're worried, like, you're trying to. Why is it we always assume someone's trying to get the devil in? I'm a pastor. I'm not trying to get the devil in through Hayes. I don't know if that's the entry to the devil anyway. It seems like a weird conversation. But you could tell, just like people, there was everyone was tensed up. Let's put it that way. So I go, there's Hayes. And I go, we don't know how to use the machine yet. Like, clearly, we don't know what we're doing. So give us a few weeks. We're going to do it. And, oh, by the way, the reason why we got the Hayes machine is because we just spent like 14 grand on lights. But look how they make the lights look cool. And literally, people in the audience, I said literally a lot, I apologize. Honestly, people in the audience went, there's a purpose for this. We weren't trying to be like a rebel church. We wanted the investment in lights to look cool so that we could build the whole experience. That was part of it. Right? As soon as I said that, as soon as I was honest with the church, and you don't have to like lights or not or Hayes or whatever. You may be like, I'm never coming to your church. Good. Because who wants to have that conversation anyway, right? You're going to be all mad. I'm going to be like annoyed. Anyway, sorry. I didn't just not invite you to my church. That's not what I meant to. That's what it sounded like, I know. But like, come in. But because we're one of those churches, like we've learned when people walk in and they're in the lobby like, I don't know. We're like, don't go in there. Like, it's not good. This experience is not going to get better for you. We've got earplugs in the lobby because we're nice, because we know it's going to be loud. And so we have earplugs in the lobby, which, by the way, anytime I see somebody with gray hair, more gray than mine, we run up and give them earplugs. But here's what's great. Like the 60-year-olds, they like the earplugs. The 80-year-olds, they're like, this is the only church I can hear. I don't want your earplugs. It's the best thing. Anyway, I didn't know what I was talking about. Okay, I'm back. But here's the thing. The ability to acknowledge that we just didn't know what we were doing and we'll figure it out, and this is not some nefarious thing, and it's not perfect, and there's a reality. The whole tension in the room just went down. And it never became an issue again because people were like, it just makes the lights look cool. Well, except there is one lady who says she's allergic to it, which is not true. She keeps bringing carbon into the room and I don't even know what she puts. That's a whole nother thing. You don't need to know any of that. But, and we try and give her a place right under the air conditioning. Listen, be honest, because this is what it says in Scripture. 1 John 1:3 says, that which we have seen and heard we report also to you. We've seen it, we've heard it, this is real. This is a real explanation of what we actually know to be true. We're not making this up. Don't make it up. Don't put a shine on your testimony that is not true. Because the kids will know, because they live with you every single day. But they desperately want to know why you're there. If they think that you come into work because this is just a job for you, they will treat you as such. But when they know that your attention is focused on Christ and then focused on them, they will understand what love is. And I think that's huge. And listen, once they understand that this is your why, everything changes. But you have to know something else. Ministry happens by millimeters, not by miles. Right? You are going to have to give your testimony again and again in multiple ways until they catch it. Because this is the way things work. We always want to see these huge breakthrough moments. There's not many of those in life. And God gave you the influence over these kids for 9 months so that you could do it by millimeters. Because millimeters stack up. I love the quote in For Whom the Bell Tolls, as Hemingway writes, the protagonist went broke, he went bankrupt. And another person at John asked him, he said, hey, how did you go bankrupt? And he said, very slowly, then all at once. He said, very slowly, then all at once. Right? We work on the accretion of the gospel, layer after layer after layer, until somebody can see over the fence that have been blocking them. We don't just always lift somebody up so they can see it, because sometimes they're not prepared for that. They're not ready for that. So we do ministry by millimeters. And I'll leave you with this. I preached on this text this week, so it's really present in my mind. But this is a really powerful text coming in the book of Colossians. Colossians is this incredible explanation of who God is. The church in Colossae was a young church. They'd been distracted from the gospel, and Paul is trying to get them in. And like in Romans, he hammers them on sin. In Galatians, he kind of does the same thing, but in Colossians, he takes a completely different tack. Rather than saying, this is where you screwed up, he said, let me just talk about Jesus. And right before he begins to do that, which is the next section, which I get to preach this weekend, he says this, listen, I take joy being strengthened, I pray for you, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you might have great endurance and patience, and giving joyful thanks to the Father who's qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness, brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption and forgiveness. We could break down almost every single word here, but I want to just focus in on that front part. The first thing Paul does is pray for all power, the totality of God's power to be rested in you. Now, let's not diminish the prayer that Paul is making for these people. He says, listen, the God who created the universe, and he's about to talk about how God Jesus Christ still holds the universe together. He says this in Colossians 1:19. But he says, listen, I want all the power of the God who created everything, who created the universe, who created the oceans, who created the mountains, who created you, all that power to be rested in you. Why? So that you might have endurance and patience. You know why? Because love is not an event. Because love is a lifetime's work. And you need great endurance and patience in it. And by the way, endurance and patience are different. Endurance is the ability to go through something hard and come out the other end. Patience is the ability to understand your situation and know when it's not going to get better and still be okay with it and deal with it calmly. And so he says, I'm going to pray all power be manifest in you so that it comes out as endurance and patience. And about March 15, you're going to need that. Right in your school, you're going to look at those kids and be like, you're all bad. And they're going to look at you like, no, we're not. It's your fault. You made us this way. And then you're going to have to figure out how you have endurance to the end of the school year. But the truth is, he is praying for all power. And by the way, he goes, and by the way, the one who qualified you for the kingdom, it's not you. He says, in this translation, it says, He has qualified you to share in the inheritance. He is the one who has given you this. You have all the power that you need so that every student may know who Jesus Christ is. Right? They may not get math quite as well, but this thing they need to know. You have one job. You have one job. And the very tip of that spear is that they might know who Jesus is. The rest, you're professionals. Of course, do the rest of your job. This is the thing that should wake you up every morning. This is the thing that should fire you up. The ability to let someone know how much you love Jesus and how much Jesus loves them. And it's not a one-time event because love is not an event. Love is a lifetime of learning about who Jesus is. So you will get your testimony again and again and again. And when you're not saying words, you're still giving your testimony. So be intentional about the way that you do it. Because there's a fallacy that we have to be somewhere spiritually, right? I mean, that question even is weird. I'm supposed to ask it. I'm a pastor. How's your spiritual life? When somebody asks me that, I always wonder, do you want to know how many times I pray during the day? What are you asking me? Exactly. Because sometimes it's bad. But life is bad, so it's hard. And sometimes it's great. I don't know. Ask me in 10 minutes. It's like the weather in Michigan. I never know. That's why I don't live in Michigan. But we have an opportunity. And this really harkens back to your calling, just to bring this all full circle. You got into this business so you could do this. The rest of it, that's just your professional competency that you get to do, and have a lot of fun in it, because that's what you've been trained to do. You should be better than anybody else. But this part, this is the value add. This is the reason why people pay for this education. Can you believe that? And if our greater church would just understand that we don't have to spend millions of dollars on evangelism. What we should do is pour millions of dollars into our schools to make them the best place ever, and we will do evangelism. But you have to take that responsibility on. We have to trust that you can give your testimony and that you will want to give your testimony day in and day out, again and again. So don't forget, because there is a grind that happens in teaching that pastors don't have, by the way. I mean, we preach a lot, so it feels like Saturdays every other day. just for the record, but you have a grind that is real. And so we want to respect that and know that you're doing an amazing work that you do. But if we could come together in a little more robust fashion with a real intention, man, this world is changed. And by the way, then our schools are full and our churches are full because people know why we're here. We're not just giving education. That's not what we do. We give a different product. We give hope and a hope of eternity. Listen, can I just pray over you guys real quick and we'll let you go? Hey, Father, I just want to thank you for this amazing group of people who day in and day out step into their classrooms, step into their gymnasiums, step into their choral areas. They walk into these places in order to just exude you, Lord, be present, be palpable in their lives, so that is not a reach for them, but it's so accessible to them that it flows out of them, Lord. May they recognize their calling. May they lean into it again and again, even when it's been a long time since we heard those words. I think of Mother Teresa and how she heard that calling very early on and didn't hear it for a long time, but was able to patiently endure and do an amazing amount of work for the rest of her life. Lord, may we be that. If we don't hear you every day, may we have heard you loud enough once. And Lord, be with them. They've got a long year ahead, and I know they're going to do amazing things. Thank you for their commitment to our young people. In your name I pray. Amen.
So we want to thank Tim. If any of you would like to come up and talk with him, I think you have time. He's catching a flight back to LAX, and are you eating lunch? Okay. So anyway, we are so appreciative to him. Thank you. It's lunch. So go and enjoy. We'll see you back here when the program says, okay? Thank you. Thank you.